Hello friends, and welcome. I'm sorry I have a strange noise which has now ceased as I've begun to talk. So I can only imagine it's a gecko or a rat. Oh, I'm very happy to announce that further to the gecko drama, we have new members of the family. A couple of eggs have hatched and 2 new eggs have been laid. So we lost a gecko, and a week or so back we lost another gecko. But with the new arrivals and the new eggs for future arrivals, the balance has been redressed. So that's some good news. If I can carry on with the questions and answers from yesterday, because I only got round to answering 3.5, which wasn't very many. I'll try and get more to the point today. The half was with regards to my living in India and now in Thailand, the transition. Actually, let me read the question, because I didn't yesterday. I saw the question and started talking about it. So, from subscriber, please, no, not that one, this one. Previously, you were living up the mountain in rural India. Your life then appeared far more random and varied. How does this compare to your life now? How did you find the transition to such a routine existence? Okay, what I spoke of yesterday was in more generalized way about the difference between India and Thailand, but specifically in answer to your question, the transition to such a routine existence isn't so much this monastic routine is pretty much the same anywhere you go. Even alone, we maintain the same rules, 227 Bhikkhu training rules, which largely determine what we can do and how we go about our day. For instance, eating not in the afternoon, and certain activities we are unable to do before dawn, which is more or less a few minutes, 20 minutes before sunrise, and how we wear our robes in public. All of these things are part of that. When we shave our heads, when we wash our robes, all of these things continue wherever we are. All monks are working from the same plan in that respect. So we have this same routine. In the monastery, when you're living within the monastery, so for instance during the Vassa period that's coming up, the monks lock down for 3 months, then again, wherever you are in the world, within this tradition, these monasteries have the same schedule to go along with this routine. So nothing much changes there either. Where it is different is when you're not in the monastery. Now, I answered your question by saying that the jury's still out on this one, meaning, the jury hasn't given a verdict on the difference yet. Why? Because I haven't had long enough here in Thailand. I've been here for about a bit over 6 months. I think you need about a year in a place to really get to know it. However, since I arrived, well, the day after I arrived, I've only been in this monastery. I haven't been on Tudong wandering as I was in India, like I explained yesterday. So the only journey I've had, apart from some brief trips out for the immigration offices and things like that, those kind of things, when I was very well accompanied and looked after. I was with another monk and a kapia, so an assistant, a lay person, to do the things we can't do, drive and pay for things and, you know, this and that. Apart from that, it was just my journey from the airport to the monastery. Now, there were huge differences in that. I could see in just that half a day, really. By being in this Buddhist country, everybody knows exactly when you're dressed like this what you are. They also know what you're, you know, unable to do. So they very much take care of you in that respect. I literally was able to just walk straight out of the airport with no questions asked, no queuing at passport, immigration, or any forms to fill out. It was just, no, well, you know, you just go straight out. Okay, we had a very relaxed situation with visas at that time. There was no, I think there still is a visa exemption for British passport holders. But nevertheless, as a monk, you really do literally walk straight off the plane and out of the airport. It seems, maybe that's the same for everybody, but that's certainly not the case in India. Quite the opposite. In terms of then the journey, well, I went on the metro, and I did have to buy a ticket. Because it was a machine. It was the only way I could get the little plastic disc to get onto the thing. So I used a card, which I have for emergencies, what you call a debit card, so that works over the place. But then when I got to the bus stand to get a ticket, someone got my ticket. They got me a very nice seat on my own as a monk, so I wasn't sat next to anybody, and they brought me water, and they know I wouldn't eat in the afternoon, so they brought me fruit juice and such things, looked after me all of the way. When they stopped the bus, they asked if I needed to use the Hong Nam, which is toilet, and very, very well looked after. Literally, and then the next day I stayed in the guest house where I used to stay as a layperson here in this same town or village, and I, in the morning early, went on alms round. So much offering, I was at a loss to know what to do with it all, and I came here, and I've been here ever since. So that is my experience of living as a monk in Thailand, because previously my experience in Thailand, I was a anagarika, a white robed or a lay person, basically on the 10 precepts or 8 precepts, staying in the monastery. But when I was travelling and journeys, I was not a monk, so I was treated as an ordinary person. So this was my first experience in Thailand as a monk, having been a monk for 3 years in India. But in India it's very different, because they're very used to monks. They have many sadhus and all monks of different persuasions and religions. And monks are very respected. You will always get offered food, but it could be at any time during the day. So when I was on Tudong and travelling, I would generally go to Hindu temples where you would get prasad, which is usually early enough in the day to allow me time to eat it before noon. And that was the difference there. You could go on alms round. I tried this, but it really didn't work because people didn't know what this was. They thought it was a drum, or they thought they could put money in it, and we don't accept money. So that was not going to work very well. And of course they don't know about the little intricate rules of how one treats monks. So you don't touch monks. You may bow in Anjali like this, or bow on the floor. But of course in India they like to do a lot of namaskara, touching, putting their heads on your feet and this kind of thing, which isn't okay in Thailand, but you have to accept it as being okay when you're in India. But the point you're making here, I think, is that I was living in rural India, up a mountain, free, if you like, yes, free to do as I pleased. And yes, to some extent, most of the time I was. I did every 15 days have to return to my monastery for the supposita, the rule recitation time, and just to keep in touch. But there was a period before I was a bhikkhu, so I was a samanera, a novice monk, for a year, when I was pretty free to wander without having to go back to the monastery that often. And I spent 3 months at a time just wandering, eating prasad for my meals, and living in caves, living in the forest, living on this rock near the beach. And yes, to some extent I was not constrained, not restrained by walls. I mean, we don't have walls here, so to speak, but there are monastery boundaries that you would observe not to go out of. But we're in a huge forest on a huge mountain with a huge expanse of beach, so you'd have to walk a long way to leave this monastery. So there's not that feeling, whereas the monastery in India, in the city, is walled, and you are not really able to go out unless there's a good reason to. So in a way, in the monastery in India, as I would be in England in the monastery, I'm a little bit more enclosed than what seems to be an enclosed situation here. But in terms of my time when I was just wandering around in India, I'm still bound by the rules and practicing really the same, much the same, exactly the same schedule, really, as I have explained here previously. Waking up at 3, 4 in the morning, meditating, at sunrise going into the town to get food, either staying in town and eating it or bringing it back to my kuti or wherever I was staying. If I had a kuti, I would bring it back to the kuti. If not, I would eat it at the temple in town, because it's too hot to eat outside there most of the time at late morning. I would eat a bit later when I was living in India, because you couldn't get the food as early as you have it here. And then the afternoon was just a case of finding some shade and meditating until the evening. Then I did have some people that would come, various people, tourists or people staying even for a long time in India, who would come and visit me and join me in meditation, and we'd have some group meditation. I'd give some guided meditation, maybe teach some meditation, just to 1 or 2 people occasionally from time to time. And then the evening was much the same, spent in meditation, maybe listening to Dharma talks if I had some electricity. The one time when I was in a different situation again was I stayed alone for the last year's Vasa in a place, a small town outside of the main city where my main monastery was. And I was in a vihara, which was a small, a temple, and a small accommodation for just sort of 1 or 2 monks, but I was alone as a monk, just with a kapia, this temple boy, or he's a man but an assistant, you know, someone to just do the things we're not able to do. And for that 3 months I was there, but I could go on alms round in that town. There weren't Buddhists around, but after some weeks they got used to me, and you can see all about that on these videos if you go back to when they began, because that's where I started doing this. So in terms of answering your question specifically, and it is a good question, at this stage I can't, the jury is still out, because how am I dealing with the transition? I haven't so much as had the opportunity to notice it yet. I've come here, I've continued as I was in India, but with a little less distraction, a little less noise, a little less goings on around me, because of course I am within a monastery, but it's not really an enclosed kind of environment monastery. So in a way, I have more freedom. I don't see anyone here. In India, I'd see quite a few people, so that's a big difference. Yes, so I hope that does kind of answer the question. I'll probably have to talk, though, I think, generally speaking, about the similarities and the differences between Buddhism here in Thailand and Buddhism in India. Primarily, it's all based on the same scriptures, so it is the same in that respect, with the same underlying theme. But what is different is when you live in a Buddhist country with really no evidence of much in the way of other religions, as a monk you do feel really part of the people. You're not something strange, you're not something different. But when you are out in public in a non-Buddhist country, and although Buddhism comes from India, it's primarily Hindu and Muslim, then Christian, Buddhism is quite low on the percentile. So you are an anomaly, you're something strange. So you're something different. And that has a whole different feeling and meaning behind it. So yes. I'll continue then, I think, with the questions. And I'll start with the first one rather than picking and choosing. And I'll need to read this one too, because it needs the context in which the question came in. In the Dhammapada, there is a phrase that says, "He abused me, he struck me, he overpowered me, he robbed me. Those who do harbour such thoughts do not still their hatred." So that's about number 3 in the Dhammapada. So it's very at the beginning of the book, and a very important verse. Those who do harbour such thoughts do not still their hatred. And the question is, what thoughts should I harbour to still my hatred? The quick and simple answer is thoughts of loving kindness. Metta is the Pali word for loving kindness. One of the 4 of the Brahma Viharas: metta, loving kindness; karuna, compassion; mudita, joy for others; and upekkha, equanimity. These 4 Brahma Viharas are how we counteract resentment, anger, hatred, and even fear to some extent. Because if you put something in your mind, a feeling, of loving kindness, of metta, it's hard to build up resentment, hatred, or even fear, because you have instilled this quality as a mind state within you through this practice. This is what metta bhavana is. Metta bhavana is development of this quality of metta, this one of the 4 Brahma Viharas. So what the Buddha was alluding to here was that you are thinking that this person, he's abused me, you're thinking he struck me, you're thinking he overpowered me, and you're thinking he robbed me. Don't think that. Just think compassionately that this person is misguided, has acts of body, speech and mind have been very unwholesome. He is he's made, what's the wrong word, made? He's accrued bad karma as a result of, karma means actions. He's accrued bad karma as a result of these poor actions. if you're thinking that way rather than what this individual has done, and bear in mind these verses are illustrative, it doesn't have to be so harsh. It could be somebody is just annoying you a little bit, or just think compassionately, oh well, they can't help it. Not feeling sorry for them in a patronizing way, but they are unwise. They haven't had the opportunity that you have had to develop these wholesome mind states, to have found some wisdom and learn how to keep sila and behave in a unharmful way. Unharmful in terms of not necessarily physical, but your actions and your speech and your attitude, your thoughts, as to how that affects people around you. You've become harmless. When you are a harmless being, any beings that are harmless, they attract people of a similar nature towards them. And other beings, other creatures even, I say other beings because this is the same with animals. When you have this harmlessness about you, animals are not defensive. So really I don't worry too much about these snakes that I refer to, because they would really only bite a human in self-defense. So as long as you're careful, and if you're practicing mindfulness all of the time, you are walking carefully, you're observing, you're making sure you can see where you're stepping, and giving these creatures the freedom and the opportunity to move out of your way. And you're presenting this fearlessness to all that encounter you, and they're not going to be prone to attack, which then builds on your fearlessness. So it just increases it more. When you're in this situation with any form of either verbal, physical, mental attack, this is how we should think in terms of metta, loving. These are the thoughts you should harbour to still your hatred. Now it could be it's very difficult if someone is very aggressive and they're very nasty for you to have any forms of loving kindness, feelings of loving kindness towards them. But what I always remind people of in this situation, or remind myself of in this situation, is that this individual, or this being, if it's an animal that's growling at you or something like this, an angry dog or a bear, you have to think, this being, it has a mother, and all mothers love their children, their child, unconditionally. Whatever that child does, the mother will love that child unconditionally. So someone has metta, has karuna, mudita for that being. And if that someone can, so can you, as does your mother to yourself for anything you do. She would still love you unconditionally. This is the thought I harbour and replace any feelings of resentment and anger towards my opposer in these situations. So I hope that helps if you come across this situation. As Buddhists, we cannot sell or give drugs to others. I consider working as a psychiatrist. Is prescribing antidepressants or tranquilizers considered as wrong livelihood? So yes, as Buddhists, under the this doesn't come under the 5 precepts of intoxicants. Right livelihood is the 4th, is it? Right view, intention, speech, action. Livelihood's 5th. The 5th of the Noble Eightfold Path, right to livelihood, means that working in an off-license or in a bar selling alcohol is actually considered wrong. It's not considered right. It's not right livelihood. It is not part of the Noble Eightfold Path, because you're assisting in providing. I mean, it's if this is your job and your work you have to do, it's nothing. It's, as I say, it's not breaking the precepts, but it's not right livelihood. That's, and you know, being obviously a drug dealer is a whole different thing. But again, it's not particularly in the 5 precepts. The 5th precept is about you yourself taking intoxicants. It could come under, if you're a drug dealer or pushing alcohol on someone, as doing harm, but even the 1st precept is specifically refrain from killing. We tend to expand upon it and say do no harm, which is where actually the answer to this question comes in. If you're considering being a psychiatrist, I don't know whether they take the same Hippocratic oath as doctors do, general doctors, but I did inquire as to this subscriber's current work, and he is a physician anyway, so he would have taken the Hippocratic oath and be familiar with this. Is although it's not worded exactly like this, it's often described as first and foremost saying, first do no harm. Now, prescribing medicine, whether it can be construed as a tranquilizer or even intoxicating, for instance with someone in palliative care requiring morphine, I mean, which is a kind of a derivative, I think, of something like heroin, you know, it's not far off. This is perfectly acceptable. It is medicine. You're doing your best to alleviate this person's suffering physically and mentally by your medical intervention with their permission. It is totally different to selling alcohol or being a drug dealer, for instance. So it is not wrong livelihood, no. Then you go on quite interestingly to say, now sometimes, I better read this, is it okay to forcefully fix them to the bed and give them tranquilizers? In the suttas, the Buddha states clearly that forced imprisonment of living beings is considered as wrong livelihood. This, the Buddha is more referring to slavery at the time, you see, where there was, this was perhaps a little more prominent than it is into this day and age. Not so much where you're, again, trying to help someone. Because of course also we put criminals in prison, in jail. So specifically imprisonment of that nature I don't think can be considered as wrong livelihood, no. As for instance someone in a psychiatric ward, they're often like prisons in the fact that they're locked and have no way of getting out for this individual and society's own protection until they have recovered. So this is okay. So you can go ahead and become a psychiatrist without fear of that being wrong livelihood. In fact, it's very complementary often towards this Buddhist practice. In some respects, it's quite it has its conflicts in terms of doctrine and beliefs and understandings, but in many ways it's complementary. But nevertheless, it's not you're not voluntarily going out of your way to do harm there. You're trying to do good. I think that's that question. Yes, number 2. Number 3. Okay, that's a little bit long. Well, I'll just sum this up. So this I think is interesting. This possibly comes from India, where they have a slightly different relationship with regards to family life there than what we're used to in the West. I mean, Asia generally is more family orientated in terms of responsibility to your mother and father and even grandparents. So this could be something based on that, but they're asking on behalf of someone else, an older man who's practicing Buddhist, who's previously ordained and disrobed because of family pressure. He now wants to ordain again. Their concern is, can he overcome the challenges and difficulties as a Buddhist monk if he is either getting older or sick? Is it okay to survive as a monk? Well, if you're clearly not in the UK, because they kind of have, or Western countries, an age limit of about 50 when you can become a monk. Although that isn't part of the rules, this is just something that's come about later on, in order that they can manage okay with looking after elderly monks. But of course, you can become a monk from age 20 and you're going to get old. So there will be increasingly more and more old monks in Western countries as time goes on. But nevertheless, this concern they're having, it rather depends where they are. Because I think they take you in at any age in most monasteries in this country, in Thailand. But probably not if you're already sick, because part of the ordination process is you have to be healthy. But you're wondering how he'll get on if he's getting older and getting sick. You know, my answer to this was, it's really up to the individual himself. You're asking me, please give your advice whether he should ordain, and shall we agree or oppose? Well, if you're his parents, which I think unlikely, then it doesn't matter whether you agree or oppose anyway. The only permission you need to be ordained is from your parents, in which case they'd be older than you, so you wouldn't be asking this question. And the only decision about this, he can only make this decision himself. You can't decide for somebody else whether they should go into a monastery. Maybe you're thinking that he'd be well looked after, we'll put him in the monastery, or maybe you're concerned he wants to go to the monastery and he won't be able to cope. That's probably more the case. You see, this is a piece of tree falling on the roof, and if that fell on your head, it would no doubt hurt. So the point being, well, you know, only he knows that, and we don't ordain for life. We can try it out. He could take temporary ordination if he's in Thailand. That's quite easily and usually done, and see how it goes and remain in the robes if it's suitable, and if it's not, then leave. So it's ultimately flexible, but it's up to him. Of course, the older you are, the more difficult it is, because the diet is difficult to get used to if you're used to many years of eating 3 meals a day, and sometimes the food can be quite limited in certain monasteries, and even where they're well supported, you know, you don't necessarily always find it that easy to get a whole balanced diet in your bowl in that one meal of the day. Largely through temptation, because so many goodies come along, you might pick all the wrong things. But nevertheless, it's really up to him. So I'll move on from that one if I can. Previously, we've done that one, good. Okay, this is quite a long question, but quite a short answer. So this is good. Do you think that Buddhism can help with PTSD? That's post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm repeating that for my own benefit, and I'm sure you all know that. Would the Satipatthana Sutta be helpful when confronting long-standing PTSD? Would it be helpful? When confronting long-standing PTSD, some concepts like anatta seem a little out there. Radical, I think you mean by that, yes. So would the 4 foundations of mindfulness be more suitable? Yes, so okay, so before I have to say, well, firstly you should seek professional medical advice. You already say you are also seeking professional medical help. So that's good. Because I'm not a doctor, I'm just a monk. So, yeah, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. The Satipatthana Sutta. That's going to be very helpful for dealing with the symptoms of PTSD, because you are looking at this whole concept of feelings, emotions arising, and you're having mindfulness of thought, of the body, and the principles behind these faculties of existence of anicca, dukkha and anatta. And yes, it could be not self, the principle of not self, a little bit difficult to get your head round if you're really experiencing some, say, physically related symptoms of PTSD, and also the difficulty of the emotional symptoms of this condition. It could be difficult to understand that. So also, as well as the Satipatthana Sutta, which is helpful with symptoms, to try and really get to the bottom and the cause of your post-traumatic stress disorder, one could use this the 12 links of dependent origination, the I can never say this, Samyutpada Sutta, Praticca Samyupada Sutta, but that's the sutta on the 12 links of dependent origination, which I've spoken about quite extensively just recently, because in that you can really work out how it is that you're associating in the present moment now, you're associating things that have happened to you in the past, and you're bringing them into this current time. So I think the answer to that, in short, is the Satipatthana Sutta can help with the symptoms, but the Praticca Samyutpada Sutta, 12 links of dependent origination, I think I've mistyped that in there, or copied it wrong or something. That should be able to help with the cause. You can't take the cause away, you can't go back and change the past, and but what you can do is what you're doing now. And this understanding of the 12 links of dependent origination will help you see what you're doing now, how you're treating events from the past. Now, I haven't got time to go through the entire 12 links of dependent origination, and I have done a video, relatively short video about that recently, so maybe you could have a look at that or read this sutta, and it's a little bit more easy because it's link by link, step by step to understand than the whole principle of anatta in itself. So that would be one way of dealing with that. But you're correct in thinking that Buddhism can help with PTSD in that respect, because of course it is about understanding anicca, dukkha, anatta. It's about understanding the principles of mindfulness, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and these 12 links of dependent origination. So I'll give this, I think, probably the... Oh, there's a quick question I could squeeze in here. Did you drive in robes? I think you were referring to my time last year. I spent a month in England. I had to go to England to get a new visa for India, because at the time I'd gone to Nepal and they refused. They only gave me a few days. I was sent back to England to get one. I had to go to the Indian embassy in London to get a new visa. So I was in England in the summer, and at the same time I took the opportunity to get rid of my old kuti, my England kuti, my van, where I was living on the beach for 3 years in. And that's why you were asking, did I drive in robes? Well, no, I didn't drive around, but I did have to, well, get it from one place to another at one point, and also take it to the scrapyard where it faced its final demise. And yes, I did drive it, and I was in robes, and it's quite easy to drive in robes. In fact, in India, many monks still drive around in robes. There's not a specific rule about driving. It's reference of driving in the Vinaya is to an oxen cart, you see, so it's kind of, there's a little bit of a grey area there. The principle being, if you're driving, you could be obviously damaging a lot of animals and insects in the process of driving, but you can do also when you're walking. This is not intentional. So there's no specific rule saying you're not able to drive. But in Thailand, I mean, I'm pretty sure you're not allowed to drive as a monk here. You might get stopped and questioned. I've never seen them driving here. But in India, I saw monks driving. I didn't drive in India. Because I didn't have a car or anything, but there was no need to either. But yes, you can wear these robes in very many different ways. When we're out in public, we, by our rules, should be wearing them to cover ourselves up. And even in that way, you can hook them up in a way that makes driving quite possible. No problem at all. So yes, I did, but only briefly, and because it was essential. It was the only way I could get the van from where it was parked for over 2 years, whilst I was in India, before I returned to get this new visa, to the scrapyard. So yes, I did. And sounds like a similar question, but you know, I think it's from a different subscriber, I'm not sure. I like the idea of living in an empty flat or van, but most of my life I have rejected spirituality and religion. So this causes some doubt. No, well, I think this has got, spirituality is a bit of a wishy-washy term, I think, terminology, and religion also, associating with Buddhism, can have slightly the wrong meaning. One can look at Buddhism really as a practical way of life. It's very much a religion here in this country. It all depends on your definition of religion and religiosity in itself. But this is just words I'm talking about here. So putting that aside, your problem here is the 5 hindrances, which are sensual desire, ill will, not so much tiredness, but restlessness and worry and doubt. So the first two and the fifth of the hindrances that are obstacles in our meditation. These hindrances also apply as obstacles in our practice in everyday life. And what is coming up with you here is doubt. You have sensual desire, so attachment to all of your goodies, your things in your flat or your van. You'd like to live in a flat or a van that's empty. I'm assuming you're in a flat that's full up, and you're thinking it would be good to do what I did, go and live in a van. Well, it would be, but your doubts are because of your attachment to the way of life you have as it is, not because of ill will, the second of the 5 hindrances, aversion to religion or spirituality. That isn't causing you doubt, because you're not leaving your flat to go and live in a van, or getting rid of all your gadgets and furniture and TVs and things because of religion or because of spirituality. You're doing it to get rid of attachment, to let go of what's unnecessary in your life, and also to simplify your life. This has really got no relation to spirituality or religion. You're not, I cannot be religious, I cannot be spiritual without getting rid of my stuff. There are many very religious people. I mean, look at the Pope. He's got all manner of palaces and beautiful things around him and surrounding him. So, you know, there's no connection there. I understand what you're saying, but your problem there about doubt is you're having difficulty letting go. I'm not sure again whether this is part of the same question. It's not, probably. It's probably a separate one. So yes, what you need to do is you just do it bit by bit. Let things go, just one thing at a time. And this is called, this is a little bit like renunciation. Nekama is the Pali word. When you give up one thing, you know, you find you can live without it, it kind of gives you encouragement to then give something else up. And then it really starts to snowball, like all these things. And before you know it, you're sitting in an empty flat. And then the flat becomes superfluous. Then you're sitting in an empty van. Then the van becomes superfluous. And then you're sitting on a rock in India. That's it. That's how it works. It's quite simple. So just do it. Yes? Or try. And you'll see you like it. If you don't, you can always go back to how you were. How did you deal with society's pressures when making these unconventional life choices? I didn't really. There were no society pressures. I think maybe you come from India, where, or a country, I'm not singling out India here in any way. I'm thinking of maybe it's to do with other religions and things. You see, in England, you're pretty free to go do what you like. I don't think anyone's going to... They might think you're odd, but as long as you're not bothered what people are thinking of you, they're not thinking of you... they're not planning to do you any harm. They're not planning to stop you doing what you want to do. They may just have an opinion, a judgment. And they may think, well, you're an odd sort of chap living like that, but they're probably not even going to voice that opinion in Western countries these days. So, I mean, I probably I don't come from the right country to be able to answer that question, because I really wasn't faced with anything from society. I suppose my parents were a little doubtful as to the whole getting rid of where I lived and going to live in a van, so I just didn't tell them. I was 40, or no, I was over. I was 50, you know, over 50. I didn't need to get their permission. You know, I just got rid of my flat, and I cheated a little bit. I lived quite near where my mother lives, in the same village in that flat. So I waited until she was on holiday for 2 weeks, and she wasn't there. So I moved out and moved into my van on the beach. And I thought, I hoped that by the time she returned, I would have. And I also did it right in the middle of the winter, so they couldn't say, "Oh, well, you won't survive. It's all right now. It's summer, so you won't survive the winter." I did it when it was really cold, really winter, really terrible. And so in that respect, but the point being, excuse me, you don't need to tell them. Maybe if you're in your 20s or 30s even, and you live in India, then yes, they do have this very close relationship in families, and they want to be a part of your career decisions and your choices and your responsibilities thereafter to the family. But I can't really speak from experience myself in that respect, as coming from the UK, because that would never be an issue. If anything, people don't really care so much what you do, as long as you're happy, healthy, and you're not doing anything dangerous. But my mother, she would have been quite a little bit worried, and my father did try to dissuade me from moving out of my flat into a van. But after I'd been doing it for a few weeks, they became accustomed to the idea. After I'd been doing it for 6 months, they'd forgotten all about it. And, you know, before the year was out, my mother was coming down to the beach, visiting me at least once a week to have a cup of tea with me in the van and enjoy looking at the sea, and she used to love it, coming to see me living in my van. I saw more of my mother in that time than I ever saw her when I lived in a flat around the corner from her, because of course she had to drive, spend some time with me, and we'd sit and chat, and it was very nice. But at first she would have opposed the idea, yes, so I didn't worry her. Didn't worry. You're not being deceitful, you're not lying, you're not hiding anything, you're just protecting them from worrying about you. So that's how I treated my vague experience of that. So I think that's about all of the questions I can answer now. I have had now since quite a few more questions, so next week I'll have another questions and answer session, let's say, but in the meantime I think pick something that I can talk about a little bit more fully, and I think really for now that'll have to do. I'm a little bit tired this evening, so forgive me if I've been a little bit less enthusiastic and excitable as usual, but at least I got through more questions and hopefully answered some of your inquiries, and that there's something useful in there for you. So I wish you very well, and if you are continuing with this practice of meditating in the morning, meditating in the evening, keeping the 5 precepts, then anumodana and sadhu, sadhu, sadhu to you, because this is the way to follow the Noble Eightfold Path. This means you are practicing sila, you are practicing samadhi, and this is how you develop panya, wisdom. So keep at it. Keep reflecting before your nighttime meditation. Just reflect on the day. Did I transgress the precepts at all? If you did, without judgment, put it aside. It's done. Just make the determination tomorrow not to do it again. And another thing you can do is say to yourself, it's just for today. Now, whatever it is you're experiencing, good or bad, it's just for today. It really helps. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.